Hello and welcome back to my channel, Yongo's MEXT Guide. For those that are new here, you are most welcome. So in this video, we'll be looking at document completion. This is document completion part 2. And mostly the bulk of the video will be focused on the field of study and research plan because the rest of the documents are, I'm just going to be giving notes, brief notes that I've already talked about actually in the introductory video of this MEXT embassy track series for master's applicants. So without further ado, let's get into the main body of the video. Okay, so the first document for today, the field of study and research plan. So we're going to read through each stage of it and go through it to the best of my abilities. So this is a sample document that I prepared to share with a friend when they were previously asking, and I thought it would come in handy to just help me break down some of the points that I think are very important for this field study and research plan, because it was one of the most intimidating documents for me, and one of the documents that I unfortunately procrastinated on a lot because of how intimidated and anxious it made me. But we're here to get through it together. And especially if I can say that if you've done research before, then you will apply some of that academic writing, those academic writing skills that you picked up at this point. So you're going to key in your name. As I'm sure you've noticed, I'm not using Adobe for this one. For some reason, I'm not able to edit the document, the 2024 document in Adobe. So I'm just going to use the same sample document because in Word, for some reason, I'm able to edit, right? And then, yeah, you fill in your name, your given name and whatnot as required, your nationality and all that stuff. Then let's move on to the instructions and read through. So, guide for creating a field of study and research plan sheet. As this sheet is one of the most important references, as you see there, one of the most important references for selection and university placement, outline your field of study and specify your research theme and plan in line with the following items 1 and 2. If plagiarism or fraud is discovered after selection, the selection will be cancelled retroactively. This sheet must be typewritten or written in block letters. If possible, write in Japanese. This sheet must be created within 2 pages. Additional materials may be attached if necessary. Both a single side and dual side printing will be acceptable. For those that are handing in hard copy documents, you can do both single side and dual side printing. So I think this is a clue in terms of the limit that's there of how many pages, because if you've downloaded this document, you will notice that it's actually 1 page. When you download the original one for 2024, it is actually a 1-page document. So now they want you to fill this in and only do it within 2 pages. But as you can see, just this introduction part is taking up like something like 3/4 of the first page, right? So it leaves one to question how much detail can you give without exceeding the acceptable limits. So because they say, and also somebody asked, in my case, my study plan ended up being 4 pages long. I can explain. 3 pages of what I thought was necessary after a lot of tweaking and revision and back and forth within myself, getting feedback from my mentor at the time. I ended up with a 4-page document, and it was only 4 pages because my 1.5 page were made up of a study timetable, like a plan of activities. You could use a Gantt chart. I used a simple table and references. So that's what took up the 1.5 pages, and the other pages were the content, the actual content. So the reason why I think at the time I was just going by my gut, I just said I'm going to take a risk because they said within 2 pages, so I just took a risk. But I think this has kind of justified why I thought that 4 pages was okay, especially since the 4 pages was not all actual content. 1.5 was just the references and the table. So they are saying both a single side and dual side. So this dual side means that if you have content on this one page, then behind it you can also put content. Then on the second page there's content. Then behind that there's content again. So I think that kind of adds up to 4. So as long as, though it's kind of a gamble, I can't guarantee, to be honest with you, that that wasn't something that compromised me, because the limitation with the advice that I'm offering is I don't know which things actually compromised me and which things they were actually looking for. I can only speak based on what, like, let's say my mentor was also advising that this is what they may look for, this is what they may, because I was getting feedback on a lot of these stages from my mentor at the time. Okay, that said, let's move on to we've read the instructions and I've given that brief introduction and made those points that I had to make about this document. So as we've highlighted here, this is a very, very important document in your application, right? So there are 2 parts. There's part 1 here, the past and present field of study, and there's part 2, research theme and plan in Japan. So let's look at part 1. So in this one, let's read through this, because this is a sample, okay, the sample document. I'll try to find a way to attach a link that will give people that may be interested in this access to the document, or you can leave a request in the comment section of this video. So I'm just going to read through this sample, because it's like, some words that you could use, some dashes there indicating you fill in what's relevant for you, and then some advice in brackets, right? So for instance, you may wish to start with past research involved. So you're going to talk about what you previously studied in your undergraduate research project. So for example, maybe you studied, I think I'll give a personal example instead. For example, I looked at food-based fortification of breakfast meal. That's a maize meal with edible insects. So this gap would be filled in with a brief statement on what you previously studied. And then you talk about where your interest in that topic came from. Then you discuss, basically you can give maybe the problem, you can input from your research report a brief statement of your problem statement, like the interest in this topic arose from, in my case, is the idea that in Zambia, 80% of our dietary calories come from carbohydrate sources, and that's not sufficient, right? And I quoted a bit of statistics in terms of the prevalence of malnutrition in our country and whatnot. So you give what's relevant to you on this blank part here. Then here's the advice basically that I think I'm just from citing. So let's go through it. So give brief explanation of what your previous research involved, why you were interested in the topic, and why it is relevant to the field of study. So you talk about why was it relevant for you to study that. For me, the relevance was just that there's not a lot of documentation on the use of edible insects in these ways, and the practice is there definitely, but the documentation is missing, right? So such things, it's good to have. That's what science, it's one of the aspects of science is documentation, because that's how, with the empirical evidence, scientists can push for changes in systems and the like, right? So I've separated each of these sample passages into paragraphs just for flow, just for ease of so that the story you're trying to tell by answering this question can flow nicely. It's not just like one bulk. There's order in terms of what you've talked about in the first paragraph, second, and so on and so on. So in the next paragraph, I recommend that you talk about, so let's just read this. I'll just say, then give a brief problem statement indicating gaps in existing research that you may have been trying to fill, or how your study may help to solve the problem. You may include a reference or two to back certain statistics. So this statement, I've kind of covered it in also this first paragraph here, talking about just how the interest arose, and when you mention this problem statement, you can quote some striking statistics and give reference to them, because it's not mentioned in the instructions, but I thought it necessary that if I was going to write a study plan, the study plan will require me to, it's like you're writing a mini project proposal. Let's move on to the next session of 10 minutes. Okay. 10 minutes. This is the next 10-minute session. So it's like you're writing a very, very, very condensed proposal, but you want important points to come out, and those important points you may wish to back them with some reference. So for me, I found it important to include my references there, even though that was not required. Then you can talk about, in this next part here, it says the study involved determining. So now here is a brief explanation of your study methodology, and finally major outcomes of the research, for example the results, conclusions, and their importance. Then this is just a continuation of this, right? So the findings were that such and such and such, after you've talked a bit briefly about your methodology of your undergraduate research. Then this was important because you may then connect, and so you fill in here. So this is just some advice on this part. So you may then connect your past research to future recommendations and study plans briefly, and their benefit for both your country and Japan, because in this past and present field of study, I think there's value in being able to conclude with, when you talk about your future recommendations and study interests in this last part, and link them to the conclusions of your undergraduate study. I think there is merit in trying to see how those future recommendations can benefit both your country and Japan, because you, as much as possible in your application, you want to sell yourself as somebody who is not only going to receive from them, because definitely all of us, when we want to go to school, we want to get something out of it, but they are sending you to school on their government's budget, so they want to know what they can get out of it, what value will your studies there bring to the table. So you can highlight something about that here. Then here is just an example sentence. For example, at present and in the near future, this concept can further be explored, and you include some of your future recommendations and study plans. So I thought that it would be nice to conclude the past and present field of study in such a way, because then the story will flow nicely into the second part, because that's where on question number 2, they ask research theme and plan in Japan. So it's like you will not be jumping from one thing to something completely different. There will be, I thought it would be nice to have that flow of ideas, and that's why the last paragraph I recommend in this little sample, concluding it based on your future recommendations of study relating to the theme of study you want to do in Japan. So let's look at this now. So research theme and plan in Japan. So describe articulately the research theme and plan you wish to carry out in Japan. Specify particularly the ultimate goals of your research in Japan. So for me, on this research theme part, I thought it helpful to take notes from my an undergraduate course that we did in between our fourth and fifth year, called research communication, where we were required to learn how to write things like concept notes, project proposals, and final reports. Okay, so in that concept note outline, the concept note is also like a very brief study plan. So because if you Google how to write a study plan, if you simply Google, because that's what I also tried to do, I simply Googled how to write a study plan, it will tell you that there's no one size fits all. It has a general structure, and you, as depending on what your field of study is, you may your study plan may take a slightly different form, and that is okay. But the point is, if you've done research before, you can look at how you structured your final research report. I think that's like maybe a little formula. You can look at how you structured your final research report, and then pluck out some subheadings or headings that are quite prominent, or that can help drive your points home, and infuse them into this research plan as follows. So for example, let's read what's here under this summary part first of all. So under this second question, there are two things. There's the theme, research theme, and then there's the research plan. Okay. So, for example, on this part, research theme, I wrote in this sample document that you can indicate proposed research title and briefly summarize what you hope to do and the relevance of potential outcomes in one short paragraph. For example, the study, or you can even say the proposed study, will focus on such and such and such, and study outcomes will contribute to such and such and such. So this research theme is like a very brief, one paragraph long um, summary of what you will then start to talk about in your research plan, because the plan is just to give them an idea that okay, this person has thought about how they are going to actually achieve the goals of this stated research theme, is what personally I understood that they were asking for in this document. And again, take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. So, under the second part of the second question, the research plan itself, this is now where you will break down into subheadings certain key elements of what you plan to study. So, for instance, so let's read just through this. So, under this section, experience gained at undergraduate level when preparing a concept note or research proposal can be applied to fill in the necessary information under each subheading as follows. So this is not the only way you can structure it. You can do it in a way that is relevant to you. But this is just a sample document for the sake of like just having an idea. I know I would have really appreciated something like this, but I had access to something like this, and I'll put a link in the description to a video that I referred to, and that really, really was relevant to me in preparing my research plan for MEXT. So the introduction, you use your research skills to fill in your, because for me actually I even just went to my research report. Actually, no, sorry, that doesn't apply in this part. Well, yeah, you can go to your research report for ideas just to get the juices flowing again, just to remind yourself, if need be, how to go about writing an introduction to a concept note or a project proposal. But this introduction, make it as brief. Important, of course, you describe the key elements, you talk about what they mean, what has been done, and all those things that go into an introduction. And then problem statement and study significance. So this is now where you talk about, okay, but like what is it that you want to solve, right? And this is because, of course, when it comes to a study, no one person can solve every problem in their field. So, of course, you need to now specify, right? What exactly is the problem that you're hoping to tackle based on what you talked about in the introduction, based on some of the key statistics, maybe it's striking statistics related to the problem. And then you give that problem and study significance. So, if, in my document, I actually did write them like this. I would say introduction, comma, not comma, sorry, colon, or you can underline, it's up to you. But my point was just that I structured it such that someone could clearly see, here's my introduction, there. Problem statement and study significance, there. Then objectives. So you can give you can break your objectives into main objective and specific objectives. Okay, so your main objective, you give it, and then that main objective will be achieved by carrying out a certain number of specific objectives. So this main objective will be met by considering the following specific objectives, is what you can say. And then here I just put in brackets, you can give about 4. And the reason why I say this is because during one of those sessions, in the course that I mentioned that we had to take as undergraduates at Unza Agric, there was a seminar where we were encouraged that when you're giving specific objectives, you can write up to 3 for undergraduate and up to 4 for postgraduate, specifically masters in this case. I'm not sure. I didn't follow that up anywhere else, but for me, I think that was enough. I took that doctor's word for it and went with that in this document. Okay, then we have methods. So each of those specific objectives will help you briefly explain your methodology. So briefly explain the methodology, and I recommend bullet point covering main aspects such as major activities and data collection and analysis plans. So you can just give like brief statements. They are not expecting you to flesh every little detail out, but they want to have confidence in your ability to plan your research, because naturally they don't want someone who's not certain of anything. But you can't, of course, be certain of everything. That's why this document is only supposed to be 2 pages long. So maybe even me and my 3-4 pages, maybe I overdid it, right? So if you can achieve what is needed within 2 pages, that is well and good. That 4 pages I mentioned was just based off of that caveat they gave of like you can add additional documents and you can write back to front, and yeah, all of that stuff. Then from your methods, then you talk about expected outcomes. It is expected that the study will contribute to, and this is just a sample of how you can start your paragraph. And then in brackets I say capture as many potential beneficiaries of the study as well, including whether it's the Japanese society or the Japanese government or the diplomatic relations between your country and Japan, in terms of like the technological exchange that could take place should you carry out this study. So again, it's about like selling yourself as a diplomat, really. I would say like an academic diplomat, something like that. You want to paint a picture. Well, not that you should just paint a picture and not be able to do those things. You should, of course, the study has to be something that is relevant and realistic for you to achieve. But of course, the other reason why this document is so short is because later on it may be found that whoever agrees to supervise your work may have other ideas that they would wish to input. Then I included a plan of activities, which is tentative. You can even highlight to say tentative, simply because you appreciate the fact that you are proposing a study. This may not be what you end up doing, depending on who supervises you. So the tentative plan of study activities is as follows. Then, assuming enrollment in this, you can structure this part in a way that fits your study plan. So if, let's say, in the application document you indicated that you want to enroll in October-September period, then you will say plan of activities tentative, assuming enrollment in such. Or if you chose April, you can just say assuming enrollment in such. Or you can, if you chose both, you can just say tentative, and structure it according to what fits. So personally, I just like, based off of how I did my undergraduate, I know it's loose, very loose, but I thought it would be good for, just because this is a plan. They want to know, they want to gauge one's ability to plan. So I thought, even though it wasn't required in writing, I thought it was a good thing to include. So I gave literature review, preparation of detailed research proposal in consultation with supervisor, seeking of relevant ethical approval and permissions. These are things that I kind of just borrowed from my study plan, my proposal at my undergraduate. So yeah, I hope keep those documents very much alive. They will help. And here I also just gave a little note saying progress reports will be given to supervisor every 3 months and as required. Then references. List all references made in your study plan. Then just a little grain of salt again. This structure can be adapted, and please take all advice here with a grain of salt and not as gospel truth. This is what happened to work out for me, but of course improvements can always be made. Otherwise, all the very best. Ganbatte. Ganbatte kudasai. Also try to keep the plan brief. Up to 3 to 4 pages is how long my plan was, inclusive of references. So that brings us to the end of the review of this research plan document. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comment section. I will try to leave as many relevant links to other resources, other videos you can check out explaining this if this was not sufficient, and as much as possible in the description box. Okay, let's move on to another document. So I'm back on the application guidelines, this list of application documents. Remember it, right? There's something I forgot to mention when talking about the application form. So if you mentioned like you have some language certificates, some language proficiency certificates in your application form, let's say when you are ticking on the language like the proficiency of whatever languages, if you have some language certificates, make sure you submit those, even though they are not specified here. So just to back up what you are saying. And if, let's say, you did some preparatory courses before your undergrad, or even just after your undergrad, I think it's still relevant to submit those if they are relevant to your field of study and whatnot. So personally, I attached those as well, even though there's no particular list is particular, not even though it's not particularly listed, just to help beef up my application. So we've looked at the application form, we've looked at the placement preference, we've looked at the field of study and research plan in this video. Then academic transcript for all academic years of university attended. That's pretty clear. You get that from your school, and it should include the grading system. Please don't forget to if you're scanning, don't forget to scan the separate page of your grading system and include it there in the academic transcript document. Then certification of graduation, that's if you are in your final year and expected to graduate before you go into school in 2024. And then, or degree certificate, if you've graduated and you have your degree certificate, you will attach that. That's pretty clear. then they give the information there. If applicant has not yet graduated, they give you the instruction. Then recommendation letter from the president, dean, or the academic advisor, or at the current or last university attended. Free format, a sample format is available. Use this sample format. Where do you get it? You get it on the Study in Japan website here. Okay. Then medical certificate, use the medical certificate form. Where do you get it? Back at the Study in Japan website. Okay. Then abstract of thesis. So in my introductory video, my first video on this channel, I talked about briefly about how these documents here that are in black are not mandatory. So abstract of thesis only applies to people who have done research at undergraduate, because we're talking about masters, right? But if you happen to be a PhD student watching this, then I think further instructions are given, but like you will definitely have some um, publications out. If you're already a master's student, then you use those abstracts. So basically you just copy and paste into a separate document and title it for your MEXT application package. That's all it is. That's all I did anyway, and that was sufficient as far as I'm aware. Then certificate of language proficiency. So in my case, my university offers that and you can purchase it. So if you have these other language certificates like IELTS, or TOEIC, if I'm not mistaken, I've forgotten what exactly, but they're usually offered by the British Council. I forgot what they were called. The British in here in Zambia, they're offered by the British Council. In your respective country, you can just like look it up on the internet, and I'm sure you'll be able to figure out where you can even take such tests even online. I think there should be provisions for that. Then so even like other certificates related to the languages that you know, if you have certification, let's say you in your application document you indicated on the other languages, maybe you indicated French and you have a certificate for that, you can include it in your application package to just beef up your application. Then recommendation letter from the present employer. This is not mandatory because they appreciate, as I said in the previous video, that you may not be working at the time. Then photographs showing applicants' own works of art or a digitally recorded media of musical performance. So this is only necessary for those in hoping to major in fine arts or music. So guys, as far as document completion goes, we've gone through all the documents that need to be completed. Yeah. So I'm not going to make this video any longer than it already is. So we'll end it here, and I'll just encourage that for those that may have questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section. But otherwise, we'll move on to another stage of this video series later in another video. Otherwise, thank you for your attention thus far and for tuning in. Be sure to like, subscribe so that you get notified of the next video, and share as well. All right, until next time, I've been Yongo. See you.